Okay, welcome everyone to a brand new series on Mesilas Yesharim. I don't want to editorialize this too much. Mesilas Yesharim really speaks for itself. Mesilas Yesharim is sort of the go-to classical work of Musar Sefer that we all use in every which arena and every which circle for character development, for developing our midos, for becoming better people. So I don't want to spend too much time rather than just diving straight in to a discussion about the Ramchal and who and what he was, but this is an absolute classic, suffice it to say. One thing that I do want to mention, and I'm going to hold it up just for anybody at home who may want to see. This is the edition of Mesilas Yesharim that I'm using. It's produced by Feldheim, and what is so remarkable about this particular edition is that it includes the ha'aros, the footnotes, the comments, and the ideas, the elucidations, really, of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Schlanger. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Schlanger is, I believe, the mashkiach of Yeshivas Poras Yosef, also known as Yeshivat Porat Yosef in the old city there. If you've ever been there, it's like right next to Yeshivat HaKotel. It's Yeshivat HaKotel and Yeshivat Porat Yosef at the bottom hill. It's right by the Kosel. So I am using this edition, and it's a great edition. I've used this for years. The elucidations that he has of the work of the Ramchal are incredible. And the Ramchal, the author of Mesilas Yesharim, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato, and the elucidations, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Schlanger. I think that's fascinating that you could get two Rabbi Moshe Chaims all in one sefer. So at any rate, we're going to dive right in. And we're going to begin, actually not with the sefer itself, but with the Hakdama of the Mechaber, with the Hakdama of the Ramchal. And he notes as follows: a critical introduction to the sefer, and a critical introduction really to the way that our midos need to become developed. Amar HaMechaber, the author says as follows: Hachibur hazeh lo chibartiv. I didn't author this work l'lamed levnei ha'adam es asher lo yada'u, in order to instruct them of things that they don't yet know. I'm not trying to teach them things that they're not yet already aware of. Ella rather lahazkira mesayadu lahem kvar, rather just to remind them of what they already know. Umafursam etzlam pirsum gadol, that which is already highly publicized, that people are very much aware of. If they're already aware of them, then why do they need to be reiterated? Why do they need to be stated? Why bother authoring such a work? He says, Ki lo simtza b'rov devarai. You won't find in the Berov Devarai, in most of my words. Actually, Rabbi Schlanger says that this is a reference to the general klalim, in the general broad principles that the Ramchal is going to outline. You won't find any novel idea. You'll find things that people have absolutely no doubt over. They don't doubt their truth. They don't doubt how evident they are. Of course, these are things that we have to concern ourselves with. They're obvious, at least says the Ramchal, in terms of the broad principles that I'm going to set forth, so you're not going to find any novelty. It may be the case that within the pratim and in terms of the unique examples that he gives and some of the specific application of those broad principles to unique and specific life scenarios, that there, he says, he insinuates that you'll find some chidushim, some novel concepts, but not in terms of the bread and butter of what this sefer is. It's all already known. Ella, so, however, here's the issue, and here's really what's at stake. Specifically, not only because of, but in accordance with, to the degree that they are so well publicized, to the degree that their truth is so obvious and revealed to everyone, so too is how hidden they are, so too is how they are overlooked and forgotten. When there is something that is so obvious, when there's something that is such a davar pashut, that of course this must be the case, of course this is the reality, when it's something that is so right in front of our nose that it's, or we put it right in front of our nose because of how obvious it is, and it's something that, sure, I know that this is something that all of life and my whole character and all of my relationships is predicated upon. So then, of course, it's a davar pashut, it's simple, it's obvious, and therefore, he says, the problem is that specifically as a result, we don't give it any thought, we don't give it any consciousness. Therein lies the problem. It's true of our relationships. The relationships that we enjoy that are most critical, that are most important, are also the most obvious, and therefore we tend to take them for granted. What are those things that are so obvious to our development, who we are as character, the great people that we want to be, and the goals that we want to try to achieve, that are so necessary to that overall recipe of who we want to be and what we want to become? that because they are so obvious and because they are to be taken for granted, that we end up actually taking them for granted. He says that's the purpose of the Sefer. The purpose of the Sefer is to put back on the radar those things that we otherwise would ordinarily forget about, those things that ordinarily we wouldn't bother giving any attention to because they're not novel or difficult or complicated enough to bother with. But those things specifically is what we actually have to turn our attention and our focus to. Al Kain, and therefore, you're not going to gain much benefit from this book, from this work, by just reading it once. It may well be that you're not going to find anything new. You're not going to find anything especially splashy or sensational or new or different that you weren't already aware of before you ever opened the book. Maybe a couple of things here and there. Overwhelmingly, this deals with the basics, and they are so basic that they are obvious. Where are you going to get the real tayelos, the real benefit from this sefer is by reviewing it and through hasmada, by being constantly and consistently aware of these principles, of these ideas, that you turn them over in your mind and you think about them, give them more consideration, lend more consciousness to them. That's what's really going to drive them home. These are the kinds of things that naturally we tend to forget. In so doing, by reviewing and by trying to keep these principles in mind, those things that are our obligation, our duty to actually perform and to become, will no longer be kept away, will no longer be withheld from our consciousness and from our thoughts. We'll no longer continue to ignore those principles and those ideas that are so absolutely critical to becoming the kinds of people that we wish to be. Just an interesting point. What are these kinds of ideas? And I was thinking about this as an exercise to try to do it. Find those times. Find find the 2 minutes here and there in which you're otherwise not occupied. You're sitting in a car, you're waiting online, and you could just take out your phone and you could scroll. But imagine if you gave yourself during those 2 minutes an opportunity not just to think about what it is that I still need to accomplish today, which is already a great thing, not only to think about how it is that I'm going to try to move forward on whatever goal, whatever objective I might have, whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish over the course of the day, the week, the year, my life, whatever, but to take something that, this is so obvious, it's so pashut, that I never bother thinking about it. What if you spent 2 minutes today just thinking about something that is so obvious, something that is so fundamental to who we are, that because of how fundamental it is, I just don't bother thinking about it. So he gives a couple of examples from another, in the notes here, Rabbi Schlanger does, from another one of the writings of the Rambam, where the Rambam talks about two such ideas. Ki diasenu, what we already know, shegilui ha'erva maguna, that uncovering ourselves in an inappropriate manner, at least once upon a time we felt this to be inappropriate, we felt this to be obvious, but that is something that we naturally recoil from. That's something that we find naturally abhorrent. But it's obvious, so we don't bother thinking about it. We don't bother thinking about that great moral principle. Perhaps that's how society ended up where we are now. Because nobody's bothered thinking about it, because of how obvious it was for so many generations, now we find ourselves in a position in which it's less obvious and it's really fallen off the map and fallen off the radar. And that the greatest thing that we could possibly do is to be involved in chesed, to be engaged in acts of kindness. These things are so fundamental to who and what we are that perhaps we don't give them enough time and enough consciousness. We don't meditate over them enough. What if we spent 2 minutes? I was thinking about doing this in the car, that you spent 2 minutes taking one of these great broad concepts that are so obvious, that are so fundamental to who and what we are, they don't bother giving them the time that they really deserve. So that's a very, very worthwhile, valuable exercise for today. It's true in terms of an introduction to the Sefer, but it's true of everything that we do. Those things that are most critical, we just don't spend enough time thinking about and considering. Thinking about how good chesed is. Thinking about the kinds of midos that we would never want to be arrogant people. We would never want to be conceited people. Those midos are repulsive, they're disgusting, but do we think about them? And if we don't think about them, if we don't give them their due consciousness, then it's hard to really embed them in our personalities and in our behavior. That's how he begins. Mirza Hashem will continue in this vein throughout the coming paragraphs and pages of the Mesilas Yesharim. Looking forward to taking the journey along with everybody else.